Welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST, where every week we'll be discussing topics related to all things climate change and RChain's role in the solution. We will be discussing technologies that can adapt and coordinate massive amounts of data like never before, forming social architectures that grow collective intelligence, sharing and evaluating data planetarily, all while maintaining personal privacy and personal data ownership. A new decentralized economy is forming as we move from the third industrial revolution, digitization, to the fourth, decarbonization. By building a co-op, built on a correct by construction, concurrent, scalable solution, RChain is structured to build out the new technology that will be required for a flourishing regenerative planet. Please join us on this journey.
So hi everybody, and welcome to the Climate and Coordination RCAST this week. I am actually very excited about this because there are a couple of articles that I thought were very interesting that I found late last night. I was actually going to have a couple of other articles and then I changed my mind. So anyway, I'm very excited to talk about these two things because they're two interesting stories that have to do with U.S. politicians. And I think they're very apropos. So, without further ado, I'm going to share this first one. They're both from Forbes this week, which is not always a publication that I cite in these calls, but I just put the first one in the chat. This story is about the status of blockchain legislation in the current 116th Congress. And the headline is, Congress has now introduced 32 crypto and blockchain bills. And there's an interesting piece down here that has a little graph. It's actually a pie chart. And I like pie charts because they're visual and very easy to understand. So this is talking about all of the different sort of areas that these blockchain bills could impact life and society. So there's potential terrorism, money laundering, regulatory framework, the use of blockchain technology by the actual government, and then there's also banking. So I thought this was really fascinating because it looks like they are really trying to make this go a little bit more mainstream and hopefully make it a little bit less cumbersome to have a blockchain business in the United States. This is from April 28th. And it looks like the article has over 50,000 views already. So, and I actually didn't know this, but Forbes has, well, I guess it's not surprising, but I didn't realize they're actual crypto and blockchain contributors on Forbes, which I guess maybe that should be obvious, but I actually didn't know that. So anyway, I find this to be a very fascinating development, and the piece is really quite good. It really explains all the different areas that are in the pie chart that show all the different bills and kind of where they're trying to go with this. So I thought that was a bit inspiring. And they list some of the different representatives that are working on this as well. So there's a lot to get into. If anybody ever wants to look at this, maybe we can share the link to this article a little bit later. I can post it in Discord, but I think it's a good sign.
That is very encouraging. I mean, you know, it's always a mixed bag when you get Congress involved in these kinds of things. But yeah, it's great if there's at least some engagement, because it means people will start to get educated.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I'm thinking they're probably starting to realize that it's becoming a globally competitive situation, you know.
Yeah, it's a differentiator for sure, right? Those countries that embrace it will be very far ahead of those countries that don't. Because the technology is so new and the technology is moving very, very fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's a bit of a curate's egg, if I can use that term. So on the one side, I'll just pick out one small thing about the use of cryptocurrency and potential terrorism and money laundering, etc. Right at the end of the paragraph, it says, in addition, one bill addresses how foreign adversaries, such as Venezuela, look to avoid economic sanctions by creating their own cryptocurrency. Right? Which you can look at that in two ways, right? Good on Venezuela. You can look at it the other way, which is, how dare they? So part of me can't help but look at this and see the items in the pie chart that they've classified in the way that, so the language of the classification is language of fear. It's not, there isn't one classification there. I'll have to read the whole article, but what I was looking for was a bill that helps promote the use of blockchain technology, not by US government, by others. It's very government centric, see what I mean? I'm curious to know, what there is in terms of bills that will be used to promote and encourage blockchain technology within the United States. Don't see any of that here.
Oh, you mean the bills are basically designed to protect the government or protect?
They're the use of blockchain technology for the government, by the government, and everything else is kind of defensive, right? Trying to stop things.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that currently the main perspective, I mean, I haven't read the article, so I have to look at it more carefully, but the main perspective that I'm gathering is still digital currency as opposed to blockchain. Yeah. Because right with RChain, right, we're effectively a decentralized database, more than, and global computer more than we are, a digital currency. And I don't think that they've embraced it, the real meaning of that, right? What it means when you have a decentralized digital asset management platform, right? That's a completely different conceptualization of what blockchain is, and I don't think that that's entered into the mainstream consciousness at all.
Oh, there is an interesting bit actually, but it's kind of buried, to your point. Right, which is under the section promoting the use of blockchain technology by the US government. In the narrative below, it actually says, additionally, the blockchain working group is to conduct a study to examine a range of potential applications, including non-financial applications for blockchain technology. But it's buried right, deep in the article. But that's good. I mean, it'd be very interesting to find out who the members of that working group are. Because those are the sorts of people we would certainly want to influence and at least educate.
I completely agree. Yeah, totally. I wonder if it's Googleable.
I think we could figure it out.
It might be.
Yeah, but that'd be really interesting. I completely agree with you, and I think that would be a good idea. But anyway. So hopefully this is a progressive development and not a regressive development. That's what
I think they have to deal with the current, the cryptocurrency side of things, partly because it's what they know and what's tangible for them. And given things that have happened in the past with cryptocurrencies, you can kind of see why they're doing that. But I think generally, organs of government like Congress tend to be reactive rather than totally progressive. It's very hard to be so progressive, but you're really looking beyond your term of office. So they tend to be like a Bernie turns up, who's much more progressive and looks at things well beyond their term of office. but it kind of goes with the territory. So it's not really, I think, a surprise, but it's good that they're getting going, and very interesting. Nominate you, Greg.
Yeah, I agree. Well, is another story also from Forbes. This is from April 29th, so just a couple of days ago. This story has not gotten nearly as much attention as the other one I just mentioned, but I do think that it's very important, and I'm hoping that it gets shared a lot because, in fact, I might post it on my Twitter or something because I do think it's a really fascinating development. So this story is about Elizabeth Warren, who ran for president, and this cycle. And it says, Warren urges SEC to demand companies disclose their exposure to climate risk. So this is a really interesting piece, and I thought it was a very, speaking of progressive, very progressive development. So this is, it's talking about a letter that she wrote to the chairman of the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. And she basically is talking about how companies that, file paperwork with the SEC are usually need to talk about how overexposed they are to different types of potential risks, basically, so that they need to let their investors know about those things, whether that's debt or other things. So now Elizabeth Warren has written this letter asking them to please include climate risk, and one of the reasons is because there was a recent study done that's linked here, which is from the AGU, and it talks about how permanent damage from the climate crisis could, eclipse the damage that was done from the 2007-2008 housing crisis. So anyway, this is just basically a piece that delves into the potential risk of companies, and I think it's really fascinating that now the SEC is considering adding a disclosure about climate overexposure. And they haven't said yes yet, which is no surprise there. But it looks like they might be thinking about it. So it says here the legislation would enforce mandatory disclosures of metrics like direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions, assets related to fossil fuel that companies own or manage, how companies' financial valuations would be affected under various climate scenarios, and companies' risk management strategies related to the physical transition through the climate crisis. So this is, I think, a very interesting little piece. And I mean, I think it's great that Elizabeth Warren has brought this up. It's great that she presented this bill. And I hope that they take this very seriously, because companies that are overexposed to climate risk usually, are not even evaluated in that situation. And now you have a bit of a blind spot, I guess I would say, not just to investors, but to the entire world. So anyway, I really enjoyed reading this little piece, and it has some great information in it.
It's kind of interesting that that's come to the fore in these COVID days, because
Yes.
Shell, I think, announced today, might have been yesterday, that for the first time ever, they're not issuing a dividend on their shares, or it's not a big dividend. It's something very weird about this, and this is entirely down to the COVID crisis, because fewer people are actually using their products from Shell, because fewer people are actually commuting. So it does sort of, if you're an investor, obviously that's a concern, because that's your pension going down the tubes. So it seems like a really It's just a very sensible idea to ensure that they do, because you're protecting everybody in the United States with a, what do you call it, a 401k. Otherwise, they're left horrendously exposed.
Yeah, and and I'm so glad that you brought that up, because actually we were discussing the situation with the oil markets last week, but I think it's really fascinating that there are a lot of companies, especially the big polluters, the big oil and gas companies, and others that are sort of trying to take cover underneath this coronavirus crisis, when we all know that the oil companies have been in deep trouble many times before. So it's just not to say that the coronavirus is not attached or doesn't affect those companies, but it seems like there are quite a lot of pernicious activities going on with people trying to get bailouts and all sorts of things going on that really don't have a whole lot to do with the actual virus, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, the Shell thing. Well, COVID itself. I see it as part and parcel of the same cry for sustainability. It's highly likely that or it would have been less likely that COVID would have had the impact it had we been in a much more sustainable culture, because people would not be traveling quite the amounts that they are. They would be telecommuting much more, and that would have prevented the spread or slowed down the spread of COVID-19 itself. And if we had been more sustainable in terms of the amount of land that everyone gets to live on, so looking at real land reform in a true sustainable global picture, we wouldn't have the hotbeds of New York and the hotbeds of certain Italian and Chinese cities where COVID-19 has run rampant. So I see it's all part of the same thing. So how appropriate that Senator Warren writes that letter, because it's all part and parcel of the same narrative. At least for me it is.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's such an insane time right now, just to see just touching on what we were talking about last week with the price of oil being, what it is now. It's just so, it's just really surprising. And obviously it took a whole host of, kind of perfect storm like, scenarios to cause this all to happen. But, yeah, things are changing very quickly, I feel. And I'm not even sure if the news of the oil markets really permeated the general public. I think people who watch stocks and people who are, climate activists, and I think for a certain population of people, I think they're very aware, but I don't know if it really permeated even the global, because it's something that affects everybody around the world. It's not just in America. And fascinating times.
Yeah, and companies that, I've been running a series of ideation workshops within RChain. And there's a couple of things that came out of the last one. Somebody's put together an idea for the verification of third-party content. So imagine you're writing an academic paper or publishing a piece of content on the web that has a link to, it quotes somebody and then has a link to the quote, allegedly. How often do we click on those links and find it says 404, link is not valid? And how often do we click on it and you get a huge amount of text that you've got to wade through to see whether the quote was actually real? from that piece of, the original piece that you're looking at, and then find that it's not even there. So it's not true. And this happens all the time. And the way in which, from a congressional perspective and politicking perspective, not just the United States, but certainly in the UK as well, this use of alt-fact starts to fray if you can do that, if you can really get provenance of information. But the problem is, at the moment, is that the current web doesn't really support it. So one of the ideas was to use DAPI as the basis for effectively having a side web that does exactly that and uses RChain to store all the relevant content correctly digitally signed to give people a real trail of copyright ownership. What that does is it provides us with a better feeling or understanding of truth as it pertains to what we look at. Whether that's a bill, for instance, that from the previous one, or whether that's the way in which the article about Senator Warren and her letter was correctly done. And it totally blew my mind, this one, yesterday. Because this is exactly the thing that somebody like Elsevier, as a publisher, would want. From a music, it's like music, actually. It dawned on me whilst we were doing, it's a bit like the music side, which is you really want a situation where the producer of the original content is fairly compensated or recognised for their contribution. And you want that all to be automatic. So if somebody samples Nora Germain playing the violin and puts it in a drum and bass piece, you want to make sure that that's all tracked properly. So it's the same problem that occurs over and over again. It's just the content that I'm really referring to at the moment is more about, papers about bills, for instance, that Congress do, and that have references to things, or speeches that are given that end up helping to frame a policy and a bill that gets voted on. Or indeed the disclosure of a company in terms of its risk exposure to climate change. I'd want to know what this said is true. So when they say, here's my risk and this is how I calculate it, I want them to give me the links that I can explore to go and check that that is right. And I think there's a way of doing it now on RChain. Certainly it was quite an exciting prospect in the ideation session.
Yeah, we had a group that we invested in called Proof that was doing a crowdsourcing for journalistic content.
Yeah, I raised that in the context of the session yesterday, and it's solving a similar problem, but doing it a different way.
Yes, yeah. I think you're onto something in the sense that blockchain provides this ability to create a trail of sort of community verified trusted information. Whatever that mechanism of provenance and custody and diligence, whatever that combination is. I mean, I've thought about this. I began thinking about this a long time ago with respect to clinical trial data and other data that is associated with pharmaceutical industry, right? I mean, one of the interesting things about the pharmaceuticals is, Pfizer and Lilly and Merck, they don't really want to share their data with each other because that's their competitive advantage. On the other hand, because you're talking about public health here, nobody gets to start getting serious investment in to develop a drug or other therapeutic treatment without an article in Nature or PLOS One or some combination thereof, right? So there's this piece where the data sets have to be public and they have to be peer reviewed. But what you'd like is for those data sets to be, not behind, Pfizer's firewall or behind Merck's firewall, but up in a public blockchain, along with, here's the experimental setup. Here's the, these are the scientists who were involved. All of the provenance and diligence that goes into those kinds of data sets. If you put that up on a blockchain, and I was thinking, I didn't have the word blockchain in my consciousness back in 2007 when I was dealing with pharmaceuticals on exactly this point. But I was certainly thinking about a decentralized, publicly trusted data source.
Yeah. Well, a concrete example for anyone that listens in. Concrete example. Same thing, different domain. Do you remember Volkswagen being done for illegal testing of their cars? Right?
Oh, sure.
They got done. Massive fine. Really hurt them. If the process of doing that had been connected to a blockchain, and if the process required, all intermediate results to be stored on the blockchain, they couldn't possibly have frig the numbers, and therefore they would never have done it. It's only because what they did was go back, they did the tests, and then what they did was they changed some of the numbers to get them past the review. So the QA guy sees the numbers, says, yeah, tick, bang, stamps that, off it goes. If that had all been done on a blockchain, could never have happened, would have prevented it.
I had a very, very similar thought about the financial meltdown in 2008. The issue was that there were only about 10,000 eyeballs on the model, the financial risk models that these different companies were using to analyze their investment strategies. If there had been 10 million eyeballs on the models, then someone would have said, hey, the emperor has no clothes.
Well, and also the ratings agencies were giving fraudulent ratings to the tranches of the housing, mortgages. I don't know why I couldn't think of the word mortgages. So that was, and nobody was really looking at that. And that piece was kind of the linchpin of, well, there were a lot of linchpins, but one of the major linchpins was that these ratings agencies were giving AAA ratings to, triple B tranches of mortgage bonds, which was really bad.
I mean, what they should have done, and it was bizarre because I think the Federal Reserve and the SEC convened shortly after 2008 crash, looking for ways to prevent this from happening again. And they came up with some ideas which were all about banks keeping more collateral, but not really about understanding the causal chain of these derivatives. Because you have to follow the chain. The way that it was discovered was somebody bothered to follow the chain down to a set of assets that were clearly mislabeled in terms of their risk. Very, very clearly, when they got down to it. The problem was that they had never done the work at the International Swaps and Derivatives Association, ISDA. And I was working on FPML at the time, which is their market language for derivatives. They didn't do the work that would have allowed them to pull all the FPML descriptions and put together a model of the causal chain of events here. And then they could have run risk analysis on that. But they didn't. And and also, of course, what was happening was that people were changing stuff, and there was no track and trace of those changes. So when the first bad mortgage was done, somebody wrote the correct figure and somebody changed it. It's a bit like the VW case, but it just had a profound impact on the entire economy. This is massive. This just got spiraled out of control, largely, I think, out of Citibank initially, but then spiraled out of control everywhere. But again, blockchain technology. I mean, it's why the DTCC are interested in blockchain technology as well as ISDA. But they haven't cracked that yet. I know that ISDA had a proof of concept, but the problem was Ethereum doesn't scale. I did tell them, but we didn't have mainnet. I mean, maybe we should go back to them and tell them, hey, look, we're here now.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I think you're exactly right. So if the equivalent of FPML was, either Rolang in full or some subsection of Rolang, some fragment of Rolang that was more
How
tailored.
beautiful it would be.
Yeah, exactly. Because then all of the models are now up on a publicly trusted data source, and you
Yeah,
can just
absolutely.
yeah.
And I'm back in the day. What I was doing for ISDO, which is not dissimilar, is that they would publish the FPML fragments, and that's just saying, hey, here's my data. This is what my data might look like. And they were publishing representative sequence diagrams to say how all the actors should participate by passing this data between themselves and what they could expect in terms of state changes on it. So, big book, massive book, loads of documentation. But there wasn't a global model, aka CDL, for instance. When we tried to do it with CDL, we found CDL was very clunky indeed, so it didn't really work. But what it did do is it allowed us to encode large parts of the settlement chain for derivatives and show, in one instance, Goldman Sachs, who were suggesting a change, that their change would have caused huge ramifications in terms of liveness of the system. And that was entirely down to the use of the underlying calculi that allowed us to express all of that stuff, both in behavioral terms and using FPML in the data terms. But they just weren't. I don't think people were ready then to understand. I think they're a bit more ready to understand. Smart contracts as a terminology, I think, has helped people think about process in the way that they thought about data back then. Process is always behind. That was my argument with Tim Berners-Lee, oddly enough. But, I said you're too data-centric, Tim, because what I was interested in wasn't the data. It was actually the data over time. So I'm interested in what changes to the data. And therefore, you're naturally interested in why did it change? And that's the process.
Absolutely. I mean, it all comes down, like, it's no accident, right? And Tim is a physicist, right? So he has a very, very specific viewpoint on the world, right? So, their functions yield results, right? You can actually see it in the type, right? They would take a bunch of stuff in, and typically they produce one thing out. But processes don't have results, right? They establish conditions and properties, like so high water mark or sliding window protocol, which is the basis for TCP, that guarantees that the channel delivers messages exactly once and in order. It doesn't produce a result. There isn't a value. It guarantees a property of the channel, right? Another way to think about it is, what's the result of the internet? What does the internet compute?
Yeah.
It doesn't compute anything, right? But it provides a means of communication and coordination across the globe. So that's the difference between a process and a function. And the process idea is just, it's more subtle and requires a different viewpoint. And this dialogue about this conceptualization goes right to the heart of mathematics. If you look at the way math has been structured over the last several centuries, trying to bring process to the fore has been a long intellectual struggle and a blind spot for humanity. So it's not, no shame or blame when people don't cotton on to the idea of process, because historically it's been difficult to grasp. And that, I think, is why Milner's insights were just so incredibly powerful. They were truly revolutionary.
I'm not sure if I'm familiar with that person, but I'll take your word for it because you would know.
Robin Milner is the Turing Award winner who discovered both CCS and the pi calculus, and the row calculus, which is at the heart of RChain, essentially was me finding a small little issue with Robin's pi calculus and saying, we can fix it if we do this.
I see. Well, that sounds relevant. So I guess Ian has joined us, but we haven't heard from him today, so maybe we could invite Ian to just say hello. I would love to hear from you, Ian.
I can say hello, but sorry, there's a little bit of noise around me now.
Oh, that's okay. Well, so it's great to have you with us today.
Can I raise something?
Yes, of course.
I posted a whole bunch of links, right? This has happened because I was speaking to Dan Connolly, and he's talking about some idea about using blockchain technology to help recycling, to encourage people to recycle, right? So we started to have a conversation about that, and I think I said on a previous call that I'd had a tiny victory in my my district council, which is a bit like having a state council. It's like the state, so it's what we call our counties, and we have district councils. And I got our district council to embrace the idea of recycling paint. You know, people take old paint to the municipal dump and it just goes in a tip. And there's loads of voluntary organisations and all sorts that have buildings that need to be painted. And it just seemed like a good idea. Why not put the paint in a separate cage and allow people to come and take paint away so that you get to use all the paint, right? So I had some success with it. And in talking to Dan talks about this. He talks about these ideas about using blockchain to as a sort of almost a recycling marketplace to encourage people to recycle. And so I started doing a bit of investigation, and I posted. I just Googled the blockchain and recycling. That's all I did, and I found shed loads of recent activity. And I've also found that there are at least 2 in the UK that are doing little trials using a blockchain-based approach. I haven't reached out to them, but I kind of really would be interested in exploring those ideas on a call sometime, because when you think about our reason to be in climate change, this is exactly what RChain's for, right? And this would be a first active thing that we could start to look at that makes a difference in people's everyday lives against climate change. So that was what I was thinking.
Yeah, that's great. Didn't you email about this earlier? About the recycling? Yeah.
I mean, I just wanted to sort of table it because I don't necessarily think we should talk about it today.
No, we could definitely we could definitely do a future call about it because it sounds really interesting, and I think the topic of recycling is a very important topic these days. A lot of people have a lot to say about it, and obviously coincides with blockchain really well. So we could absolutely do a call about that in the future.
That'd be good.
But I did want to ask you.
I've been on mute the whole time, and I've been wanting to respond real quickly here.
Oh, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So this. So I think this is an important idea, especially because recycling is where you really start to have requirements for provenance. Like if you go pick up materials, especially if they're recycled computer materials, for example. A lot of those materials are toxic, or they might come from sources that you don't want to support. So anything where you have provenance about the materials is going to be a place where you absolutely need blockchain, or it's just a super it's very nice to have a trusted data source where you're seeing where you can check to see, okay, where do these parts come from, what's in them, and that sort of thing. So it's a very natural fit. And
and some of the apps, right, that I've seen, or some of the suggestions I've seen online are, mobile apps. So you take your app, you downloaded your RChain climate recycling app, and you scan the barcode or something, and it can give you details about exactly what you said. So it means that as you're shopping, if you're that minded, you take the trouble to do that. Cryptocurrency of some description on blockchain, on RChain, then you start changing other people's behavior, not just supporting the behavior that some people have. And it's that link that you build an entire ecosystem. So one's got this cryptocurrency that it's on Ethereum, so it won't scale for very long. But they're issuing these rewards like loyalty points that you can then use in particular charity shops that support the initiative. That sort of thing. Really simple, but really powerful and from the ground up.
Yep, absolutely.
Steve, it might be really great if you could talk a little bit more about these ideation sessions that you mentioned a few minutes ago, because I don't know if I've heard much about that. And I think that would be great.
Okay, so I'll give you a little summary. Let me just, I've just got to open something. So if I open this in another window, ideas, I keep it close to me. Right. And I'll share my screen in a sec. I just gotta get the right one up. Right, okay, so if I share my screen, then I can show you where we are. So this got posted on Discord very recently. So you'll see a sort of spreadsheet, and this has been shared with members in the DApps Ideas channel on Discord. So this is just a README about where we are. But I'm going to jump to the ideas and come back. Here's the ideas, right? So Tree of Wally, CRTS, RChain, Cube, Spawn, Fusion. That sounds like the name of a weird band. Liquid Democracy. There was Visual Rolang, process modeling with BPMN, JavaScript to Rolang, RV 2020, which is a voting thing, RStake, which is a staking pool thing, a reactive game, a distributed non-profit community ledger, XRefDex, difficult to say that, and keep your teeth in. And third-party content verification on the web, which is the one that I mentioned earlier. So these are the ideas, all 12 that we've gone through, and we spent 3 workshops, about 3 hours each. So we've done about 12 hours, and there's a reward for the best 3 that we take forward. So there's a gold, silver, bronze, and there's a reward of rev to each of these, which is payable to them when they have an MVP, a minimum viable product, working on RChain. Right, then they can call on that rev, and then they can use that rev. It's got who submitted them. This is all public, so it's all public to the members, for sure. And you can't really find anything more out unless they've permissioned you. And there's all the details of where where the documents are that describe their ideas, which is underneath there. I'll just cover that for a moment. So, having got the 12 ideas, we had a discussion towards the end of the session yesterday about what to do with them. So the reason why we did the ideation workshop from the board initially was about providing Greg and others with collateral that tells a narrative about why people should be interested in RChain, both from an investment perspective, if it's about investment, and a more holistic notion of investment that we might call wellness investment, for the want of a better phrase, as well as developers and all the rest of it. So having those ideas and then putting together user stories for the top 3 so that we go down to another level of detail is kind of why we did it originally, and that we can have that collateral to use it to make it easier to get investment and what have you and build our ecosystem. And we thought, let's ask the members, hence Ideation Workshops. So we sent out a call whilst everyone's on lockdown so that we've got them all, and said, send us your ideas. And we got 12. And there were a couple of ideas that didn't have documentation, so they weren't taken forward at this stage. And every single one of the authors of these ideas has presented their ideas in those workshops. And there are 3 recordings. I'm not sure who has the 27th of April recording, which is why it says that, of those sessions. So people can go and have a look at that. This spreadsheet has been shared on Discord, and people can have a look at it that are members, and can comment on the spreadsheet itself at the moment. When everyone's commented and talked through largely the README, which I'll show you now, which is the process that we're going through, I want to get the community to buy into a process that they develop. So this, what you're seeing, is a straw man. And it's now up to the community to rewrite it completely if they wish. The ideas are the ideas. So it's now about how do we rank them? How do we pick the best 3? What's the best way of doing that so that we understand those ideas better? So the straw man says, okay, we've got 12 ideas. There's all that detail. There's the recordings. We want you to rank all those ideas 1 to 12. 12 being the highest and 1 the lowest. Furthermore, there are 3 categories to rank them in. Most investable. So that's an idea that would most easily gain investment externally to RChain. So if you presented it to a more traditional VC, they'd say, yes, let's have that. And the fact that it runs on RChain would be a benefit as opposed to anything else. It's a unique selling point for the idea. Then there's most community impact. What ideas have most impact on the cooperative itself and possibly utility value for other cooperatives? So a lot of things about democracy, liquid democracy, and voting is kind of fall into that category. And then there's best enhancement. So are there ideas out there that aren't really ideas that you could turn into an app that somebody would pay for or subscribe to or whatever? They're actually just things that we probably should have in RChain over time that would enhance the experience of somebody trying to use it, the dev community, for example. And there's some ideas in that. And so what we've said is you can score 1 to 12. You can use not applicable, NA, if you don't think it's applicable. You can have things that have the same number, but then you've got to drop down a certain number. So in the ideas, I've just given an example. This is just an example. This is not really the scoring I would give these ideas at all. And it says that in the README. So under most investable, I've got 2 at 12. So then the next number available to me is 10. So I said, this one's 10, and I get a 9, 8, 7, so on. So the idea is to have everybody's votes on these ideas. Hence, what you're supposed to do is copy the spreadsheet, put your votes in, and then send it back to me or post it back onto Discord. And I'll pick up all the numbers from everybody that does it. And this will be time boxed, starting on Monday. And I will provide a balanced scorecard in each category, right? And from that balanced scorecard, the top 2 or 3 from each category will then be in a straight rank for the members to choose. Always bearing in mind why we're doing it. So this is to improve the ability of the sustainability of RChain itself. So if it improves the sustainability along certainly the investment access, the community access, and best enhancement, that's kind of what we're after. So part of this is a way of engaging the community and saying, look, quite often the community looks at the board as this, well, we don't, I don't know what they do on board meetings sort of vibe. And that we're doing things, not necessarily for all the members somehow and being secretive. So this is really just going back to the community saying, no, we're not, right? Now we're asking you for your input. and we'll do this collaboratively. So this is a model of how we're going to do the collaboration to prioritize things that we want to back. That doesn't mean we're going to back them from a financial perspective, but we bake them into the collateral that we use to try and get that investment into RChain itself. Does that give you a good enough overview?
Yeah, I think it's great. I'm wondering when you started this or when you decided to do this. It just seems like an awesome thing to do.
Not long ago, to be honest. It was like 2 special board meetings ago. So it's less, it's coming up to 2, maybe it's 2 weeks last Tuesday, something like that. It was very quick. And it was Ian, who's on the call, I'm pretty sure, who said, well, why not? Why wait around? Everyone's on lockdown. Let's get this out really quickly. So Ian kind of forced my hand, which is why the first one was on the 23rd of April. So this has been lightning quick. What's been really pleasing was, it's a bunch of things, one of which is certainly seeing Dan Connolly smile on a call. He does smile, but he was genuinely engaged and really delighted with us doing this and the participation. So usually when Dan has that smile and you get the nice email from him, that's a pretty good benchmark for being collaborative.
I agree 100%. Yes.
Yeah, I agree too.
So, and it's been a blast. Jacob presented Tree of Wally, which I finally understand, and actually gave a cool demo. Third-party content verification blew me away yesterday. There's a whole bunch of them here. With Dan's BPMN modeling, weird thing happened there. It turns out the session types community that I'm connected to have done a lot of work on BPMN to session types. So they're similar to, but certainly not the same, and not as expressive in all dimensions as the row calculus, but similar to. So they've got a lot of experience of what's good and what's bad about BPMN. And so I've linked up Dan to the #1 guy in the world on how these two work together, because it was one of Nabuka's students who's now a hotshot lecturer at Kent University called Julian Lang. So lots of things pop out of it. And there's been a suggestion, for instance, by 3 of the ideas. So the distributed non-profit ledger, so idea number 10, idea number 7, RV 2020, and number 4, liquid. So I think all 3 of these parties are now going to collaborate on one idea, because there's crossover amongst all of them.
That's awesome. And isn't it so fascinating? I've realized, just sort of on a personal note, that since quarantine has started, I feel like there's so little friction to getting certain things done. Obviously, there's friction if you want to work in the same room with people, but now that there's so much time, because obviously I'm not recording or performing or doing a lot of the normal things I would normally do, with a good chunk of my existence, it's amazing that when I have an idea, it's kind of like a slippery slope, because I'm like, well, you better get it done now because you don't really have an excuse. So I've gotten a lot of things done. And I think it's really inspiring to see you get so organized with this and get this going, because, a lot of people are kind of putting things off. And I think in quarantine, you could kind of go one of 2 ways. You could sort of just procrastinate and say, well, I'm just going to hang out until this is done. And when it's done, I'll try to get, things up and running again. Or you could be like Steve and you could just say, well, now's the time. So I hope that we all fall into the second category as much as possible, because now really is the time.
Yeah. I think that it's given humanity a needed pause. There's a lot of reflection going on out there. you know, and the creativity that I've seen explode onto Facebook of people who are, you know, getting a little bored of lockdown, and so they think of something to do. I mean, even me, right? And I'm not creative in the same way as either you or Greg. It manifests perhaps differently. So we decided to record a movie of Frodo meeting Lady Galadriel at the mirror, where he offers her the ring, and she goes into this, I shall become this queen and everyone shall love that thing, right, in Lord of the Rings. So I dressed up as Frodo, my wife dressed up as Galadriel, and we recorded it.
Amazing. I remember that scene was
awesome.
that scene was actually
It is hilarious.
Really terrifying to me, actually, but I'm sure that you do it fantastically, and that's wonderful.
It's not, don't get me wrong here, it's not professional, but it does make people laugh.
Well,
And
then
there's
it's
a lot
professional.
I'm not sure that they laugh because I intended them to laugh at those places, but you know, it has the same effect, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, so, you know, I'd like to think that I'm such a talent, really, Nora, that I'm one of those guys that can sit down at the piano and deliberately play a song that people can recognize but is clearly wrong. You know how really good musicians can do that?
Yeah.
And that's, you really have to be a good musician to do that. And I'd like to feel my movie is in that vein.
Well, that's wonderful. And also, we should just make a little note that Greg is putting out some new music today.
Correct.
That's right.
From The Crown, and I'm so excited to hear it. So you have to tell us when it's live so we can share it.
Excellent.
Yeah, it'll be live probably after noon today. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, the track is called.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. The track is called "Love Is," and the lyrics are from the Book of Love. It was a book I wrote for my partner. 1 year of writing a poem a day in English and Russian. And
An amazing practice.
it was a lot of fun. And the track features vocals by Petra Hayden and Beth Quist. And there are a lot of other amazing musicians. Tony Jabal did the production and mixing. Steve Turnage did the mastering, and we recorded at Bear Creek Studios.
It would be hard to get a duo of better singers than those two, I think. Very hard.
It would be really hard.
Well, yeah. I hope I see it on whatever mechanism that you're sending it out on. I shall listen to it with great interest.
Great.
Great. Well, thank you all for joining today. I'm sorry that we didn't have a new guest this week, but we've contacted a couple of different people. So we're looking forward to hearing back from them within the next week. And so hopefully we'll have somebody on next week. But Steve and Ian and Greg, thank you so much. And please subscribe on YouTube. And you can become a member of RChain at rchain.coop. And if you'd like to be a guest yourself, you can email us at climate@rchain.coop. So thank you all so much for a great conversation once again.
Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care. Ciao.
Thanks.